Today we don't have a hoodie on. I know, it's a little weird. If you've been following this channel, I wear a hoodie all the time, but I do have nice clothes, and today's a big day because it's my baby shower. That's right. Thank you guys so much for your goodwill towards my baby that's coming on Valentine's Day. I really do appreciate it. You guys are very, very supportive, and I really, really thank you guys for being subscribed and watching these videos, and I really hope to make these as helpful as possible during every single time I turn this camera on. I really, really do. So today we are going to get into some technical analysis for the SPY Qs, Apple, Tesla, Amazon, and Nvidia for the week ahead. And right now I'm looking at these ranges that I just made for the week ahead, which would be these purple lines, and we're seeing some interesting things. So if you tuned into Saturday's video, we were talking about how there could be some kind of small bounce. And right now we do have this as a 5-day moving average. This red line here is actually a 5-day moving average because a lot of the time when you see a downturn, you need to test this 5-day before you see a further breakdown. And if this actually does cross below this 20-day, then you know, hey, we're most likely going to 90% of the time you test that bottom Bollinger. And the cool thing about these weekly ranges this week is you can't even see the bottom one, but it's at 460.40, which is right on top of our monthly expected move. So if we did see some more dramatic selling early on in the week, look for that to come outside of that. And this is overall what we kind of told you for the past week or two. Hey, we drew this up for you because this looks like a very likely scenario because there's good liquidity in here. There's actually a retest in here if you look at the futures market. So there's a lot of things going for it. There's the 50, and this zone could be where we are at when the CPI data comes up. So we really want to pay attention to this. If we do see some kind of buying early on in the week, really pay attention to the top side. You notice that we're not breaking above this high. Maybe we do get some kind of hip fire move up, get that all-time high, and then the CPI comes out as bad. So really, that's how I'm looking at this market at this point. If we do see some buying into the CPI, I'm going to look for that CPI possibly to be some bad news, maybe creating some kind of small divergence up here. But as of right now, we haven't seen too many changes in narrative. We priced in too many rate cuts. We talked about that, ever since this price action in here, we were like, hey, they're pricing in way too many rate cuts. We're going to get into yields. And now we're getting snap back to reality, right? We're getting that snap back to reality, and the SPY needs to catch up to the Qs. But it looks like this area in here that we've been talking about is going to be very important this week. And we can see if that's able to break down because you not only have a 68% chance to land back within this week, but you also have that 68% chance to land back within this for the whole month. I am going to pull up an hourly today, and we kind of get this flatness to slightly upward move in the RSI, and we maybe could consider that at the same time as the MACD here. But really what you're seeing is this fight between the bulls and bears. Bulls are trying to find areas to come back into this market. Just right now, it seems like that narrative is not really helping, overall more bulls get involved in this. So if this wanted to head up, you can see this right in here. Maybe we do get some kind of touch up in here and see some kind of head and shoulders. I'd really pay attention to that in the shorter times, right? I'd really pay attention to this on the hourly, seeing some kind of small head and shoulders set up to go higher. But since the narrative really hasn't changed, I'm leaning more towards a further breakdown. Maybe we pop higher in the week and then we see that cross. Good part about the bearish side here is if we did see some kind of pop higher, if that rolls back down, you would be in that negative territory, meaning this trend might continue. You notice right when we get into negative territory right here, we start to see lower lows, right? We get lower low, we get lower low, we get lower low, and that can continue even if there is some kind of bounce early on in the week. So really pay attention to both sides of the coin because it's important to see what that price action is doing before that CPI data is released. If people are getting overly bearish or overly bullish, we can see some funny things happen, right? We can see a bad CPI, and if we get too bullish, we can see that ripped away. But if we actually get too bearish and then we see a okay or good CPI, we can see that buy back up, which 68% of the time we do land in this zone. So it's just something to pay attention to. But as of right now, that close on Friday, we were really talking about how, look where it is. It's right on this low. So that's where we were talking about a possible head and shoulders setting up, and that could still happen before we see a further breakdown. Now the Qs, we're seeing a bigger breakdown, right? We weren't able to hold up at this low. We're seeing those tech stocks really sell off, and that's because those yields really do affect the tech stocks at this point. So we see those yields, going up pretty quick. And when they go up quickly, that's when we see a little bit more pain in these tech stocks. So if we wanted kind of a day like we've had on Friday, a day like we've had on Thursday, that would make a lot of sense for Monday in these tech stocks, get an actual retest of that 5-day moving average, and then maybe we see what happens if we're able to break through one of these levels. That's really what I'm paying attention to. You're seeing that downward move, but we're still in positive territory. So until we fully get into negative territory, you can't necessarily say this is a crash. You can't necessarily say we're in a bear market. So we really want to pay attention to this week. And you'll notice, where do those weekly expected moves line up? Well, 404.82 to the upside, and look at that, 388.68 to the downside. And where does that line up with? Well, it lines up with that liquidity that we've been saying to pay attention to for the past couple of weeks during all of this run-up. Really look like we were going to fall from these levels, and once we do, hey, we need to look for a source of liquidity to head higher, where those buyers might be hanging out, and they're probably right in here. And if we get some good news while in one of these zones, we can see a significant bounce. Now, we will cover this in the future because this bounce could just set up some kind of lower high, but I really think we are going to see some steam behind this move to at least get the SPY to a new all-time high. I really think they want that narrative, and that would be, these markets are really set up to make people lose as much money as possible. When you're in crash territory, when you're in the potential of a bear markets are set up to make people lose the most amount of money. And that would mean that they need that narrative of a new all-time high in the SPY. And that's really why I'm leaning towards it, because that would make people very, very bullish. You would start to see headlines of, we are getting a new bull run. And that's why I'm really leaning towards some kind of all-time high, a new all-time high in the SPY. And that means that the Qs are going to have to help the SPY out. As we go into the shorter time frames, you can kind of see down here, you don't necessarily have that divergence on the MACD, but we do have this more upward line on the RSI down here. So really pay attention to this, because these can produce some kind of bounce. But we talk about on this channel, just because you have divergence doesn't mean you have to get a bounce. A lot of the time when you do see these divergences, you need some kind of news, you need some kind of narrative. And the good part is we do get CPI data this week. January 11th, we're going to get that CPI data, and that could be something that really turns around this market. So if we do see further breakdown, I'm going to be looking for divergences on this 1-hour chart. And if we wanted to head higher straight away, then I would look for some kind of cup and handle, right? We would look for this area right in here, get some kind of handle, and then start to head upward. To the bear side, right now you're just looking, if this MACD is able to curl over, we're not in oversold territory anymore. You can see lower levels, and I'd really pay attention to this weekly expected move. Why? Because it lines up with all this liquidity in here, which means this is where buyers are sitting. So we really want to pay attention to both sides this week until we get that CPI data. But as of right now, we're seeing a further breakdown. So we have to be very, very patient and wait for the signals to really show us, hey, there's some news, and we have the signals at the same time to turn the Qs around. I'm just going to tell you right now, you need to be paying attention to Apple and Tesla this week. Apple and Tesla are going to be very important things to pay attention to. Really, every single stock that we cover is going to be really important to pay attention to this week especially. So really try to watch these videos all the way through, like them, so more people can be aware of the signals that we're paying attention to. But on Apple, we noticed that you had that daily divergence. So we said, yeah, you have potential for a bigger pullback down into here, but you have a potential, because of that divergence on the MACD and the RSI at the same time, for a bigger pullback. And that would lead us to believe we're going to come into a lower zone. Now, the good part is we do have a rising wedge. We do have a triangle in here, so we can pay attention to the bottom side of that. And we'll really give you the weekly ranges. If you are part of my Patreon, you can pay attention to these weekly ranges, because that weekly range most likely will sit down in this level down here. So we really want to pay attention to Apple. If it starts to break down through this level, what we want to do is we want to pull up these weekly charts. We want to see if by the end of the week this crosses, because this will be a very bad signal, right? If this actually crosses, this could be leading you to believe, kind of like Nvidia a few months ago. When Nvidia showed a signal kind of similar to this, I think it was on a daily chart, we saw that signal. We saw Nvidia dropping to lower levels like Apple is right now before the SPY, and the Qs were dropping a little bit more, but before the SPY did, and that really hinted at this. So we want to pay attention to this at this point. Just saying right now, if this does cross and get into negative territory, 2024 is going to be rough. Last thing on the weekly here, so we're looking for, if this does go down to lower levels and cross, look for that to buy back up and uncross by the end of the week. And that's why I'm really leaning towards the narrative of the CPI being actual good news for the market, because a lot of people are saying, oh, the CPI is going to be bad news. I don't see that at this point. I don't see it in the data, so pay attention to the CPI release, because if this starts to break down and keep this crossed, it's a very, very good probability we're going to go into negative territory. And when we go into negative territory on the weekly, we see volatility come in. Okay, so we get into negative territory right around this bar right here. Boom, we see the volatility. Sure, we get bounces, but we see volatility. We get a little squeeze up in here, and then we see volatility again once we get into that negative territory. So we cross back into negative territory, we see volatility. We stay in negative territory, we see volatility. And that's what we're really talking about here. So the CPI is very important, and you want to pay attention to Apple this week. Now, you notice this on Apple. I do like for the individual stocks, I like these 30-minute charts a little bit more for my trading strategy. So I'm just going to share 30-minute charts with you guys. Now, if we look at Apple, we've had this trend. We're kind of testing it at the end of the day on Friday, so that's interesting to see what will happen. We had a divergence here at the same time on the MACD and the RSI, right? So we want to pay attention to that, but it looks like that bounce is leading to nothing because we're coming back down. So I'm waiting for another point of reference on the MACD, which would actually bring us down into this zone down here, and maybe around that time we start to see buying back up. We get some CPI data, and then we'll have to see what happens from there. So this is what I'm paying attention to in Apple. I think you have a very good probability of coming down into this zone before we see that buying come back in, but I'm open to all scenarios. So if we wanted to head higher from here, well, we got a little head and shoulders in here that we could pay attention to. And then if you want to spread this out, we actually have a little liquidity in here. So if we wanted to head to higher levels and then pull back, you'd see another little group in here, grab this liquidity, and then start to head higher. So this is overall what I'm paying attention to. There's a lot of little price action. We get a lot of liquidity zones on the 30-minute, which is very good to pay attention to if you are a shorter term trader. But the thing you really need to know is you're still in that negative territory on the 30-minute. You're not in those oversold conditions anymore. So we can see a move down into this zone first and then get another point of reference on this divergence to give you that triple divergence before that big news comes out on Thursday. This is why the individual stocks are going to be very important to watch all week long. You're going to want to watch these because Amazon has a weekly divergence as well. Okay, so Amazon has that weekly divergence up in these areas, and we'll show you guys that here in a second. But we were just paying attention to there's divergence on the MACD, but not necessarily the RSI at the same time. So we were expecting it to go into a liquidity zone, and look at that, it comes back into here. Now, Amazon is far away from this 5-day, so if it wanted to, bounce around kind of like it has for a couple of days, for that 5-day to catch up, get a little test, and then head to lower levels. Where would it head to? Well, it might need to head into here, which lines up with this. So you have a little bit of a zone down here to pay attention to. Most likely this will be where our weekly expected move is setting up. So do join the Patreon if you want those weekly expected moves, because this week they are going to be very, very important. And if this is able to get into negative territory, then we might be in danger of this weekly actually rolling around, right? So we could see this weekly divergence roll over. You have it on the MACD up here. You have it on the RSI at the same time. And if we saw that break down to further levels and not be able to buy back up, then we could see this actually cross. And that just tells you, hey, there's a good probability that we're going to go into negative territory with a divergence on Amazon. And that means very bad things, right? Because we see further selling once we get into that negative territory. Amazon's a little bit different than Apple that we just went over, right? We don't necessarily see 30-minute divergences at the same time on the MACD and the RSI. So look at this MACD behavior. We're kind of just trickling up, which means, hey, we're moving sideways, okay? So this is kind of consolidating, and we could see a break to the upside. We could see a break to the downside. Really be patient for those kinds of things to play out. But if this MACD is able to roll down into negative territory one more time, you're going to see this break down to a further level, and then maybe we get a divergence set up before that CPI release. So this is overall what I'm paying attention to on individual stocks. I do believe there might be some selling early on in the week, but I wouldn't be surprised because of this consolidation. I'm really just paying attention and reacting. If we see an upward move, okay, maybe we come and fill a gap and then we start to break down. The main thing I pay attention to with my trading style is if that's actually able to hold in positive territory. If that just comes back up to here and then rolls back down, you have a good chance of testing these lows or making a new one. And I'm really leaning towards a new low into the early points of next week. On my thumbnail for Saturday, I did say, hey, you really want to pay attention to Tesla this week. And the reason I want you to pay attention to Tesla this week is because if we start to break down below these moving averages, below the 200 and things like that, we can get into negative territory What happens in negative territory? Well, look at this. We get dramatic selling. We gap down and we just go. So we can see that kind of selling come in, and that would mean maybe we even break through this triangle we've been in for quite some time, and maybe we head to lower levels around this zone in here, or even test this low or make a new one. So we really want to pay attention to Tesla this week. We saw that divergence. There's a small divergence on the RSI up here, not necessarily in overbought conditions, but we just said, there was actually a 2-hour divergence that we were paying attention to right up here. We said, hey, it's most likely we're going to pop out of this and that could be a trap. It was, and we saw that break down pretty quickly. You're getting a sell signal as of right now, so you're right around that 5-day. So if Tesla really wanted to break down early on in the week, I'm still paying attention to this little area in here, right around the 200. We saw that as support, we saw it as support, we saw it as support, and then we started to head higher once we break through the range. Now, if we do see buying at this point, really want to pay attention to if we set up a right shoulder, because if you just look left head, right shoulder, that is definitely possible. And maybe this is all we need to get to the SPY to an all-time high. And I think that all-time high, that new all-time high narrative is going to be very important. Daily is great, but the weekly is overall what I'm paying attention to. As of this week, if this is able to hold down in negative territory, if we see dramatic selling come in and this actually gets into negative territory, that's going to be huge. So you really want to pay attention to if those divergences on these individual stocks are crossing, or if Tesla, it doesn't necessarily have divergence, but it's in this big triangle. It's been in for quite some time. And you can see if we were able to get into negative territory, it's a very good chance we're going to break that. So we want to see if Tesla is able to get into negative territory this week, because we can come test this low, we could come test this low, or we could even see dramatic selling and make a new one. So we really have to pay attention to stocks. I believe this week is going to be very, very important. I would be paying attention, especially around that CPI release. This is the 30-minute for Tesla, and overall, I just saw on the 30-minute, hey, this could be a left shoulder, this could be our head, and maybe this is even our right shoulder, right? So we want to pay attention. It looks like, we do have some consolidation in here. So we could break to the upside, but maybe that's just to grab a little bit more liquidity up in here towards that, to make that right shoulder a little bit more significant before we break down. The reason that I'm saying that is because if we get any kind of retest or pop or anything like that, I'd really just say we could roll back over into negative territory. And when that does happen on the 30-minute here, you want to test that low, or you want to make a new one. So that's something to pay attention to on the shorter time frames for Tesla. If this is going to start, buying back up, we would want this to come up, maybe retest, get some kind of pullback, and then keep going, which would keep you in this positive territory for quite some time. So really pay attention to on the 30-minute if these are able to get into positive territory and remain in positive territory. Nvidia last week, we were showing you how it looked like it was kind of flagging, right? It looked like it was kind of flagging around here. Now that did spread out a little bit, and then it's kind of spreading out. So we could see some volatility in Nvidia as of right now, but I told you that monthly is down towards this low. So if we wanted to test that monthly at this point, we would come all the way down towards this low. That would really break us down to low levels. I don't think I'm necessarily leaning towards that this week. I really think we're just going to come into this big, this price action. We had a bunch of big bars in here. So there are some buyers at this level, and then we'll have to see from there, and maybe we do get some kind of ABC pattern, right? Something down into this area, maybe test the bottom Bollinger, and then we see another extension if that CPI is good news. So this is what I'm paying attention to. The good part of here is if we did see some kind of roll up, we could see another point of divergence to pay attention to in the future. So be open to that. And then over the next month or so, really look, we have this divergence. Well, not necessarily divergence, because this didn't come above this right here. So we want to pay attention to a possible divergence forming in the future. So this isn't divergence at this point. Maybe we actually do create a divergence in the near future. And that's what I'm paying attention to on the daily chart. People really do like Nvidia, so it has the potential to, curl up on this weekly, and we could see an extended move for a few weeks. And if we get that extended move for a few weeks, maybe let's just say we do break down, find those buyers in here, and then we start to head to higher levels for a few weeks. Okay, if we start to head to higher levels in a few weeks, and I'm leaning towards March as when we're going to see all this really ripped away. That's just my opinion at this point, but I do follow the price action. We actually would get this MACD to curl up. You would see price action head to higher levels, get a new all-time high for Nvidia, and the good part here is you would create that divergence. So you'd have a divergence from this point here all the way up into here, and if that's able to cross in the future somewhere around March, that's when I believe that we are going to see some real pain come into this market. 30-minute here actually gives a great example of how the 30-minute likes to go up. So, okay, we notice that we have this left, we have a head, and then we start to see some sideways action. Then we see that buyback up. But what do? We kind of consolidate to lower levels, and we come to this liquidity in here, create some kind of, not very steep right shoulder, and then we see that buying continue. So right now you are consolidating. You just got this to cross on the MACD, so you do have that potential to test the previous lows, right? We have the potential to test this. We have the potential to test this. So if we wanted to head lower, most likely we would break down into this area or into this area. We'd see some kind of bounce, and then we'd head to lower levels. So that's really what I'm paying attention to on the 30-minute. You're still very close to that negative territory on this 30-minute. This can roll over very quick on a 30-minute and get into negative territory, which means you're most likely going to go test one of these lows. So really it has the potential to break higher because we do have some consolidation. But since if we do get into that negative territory, we could most likely see this level tested or this level tested or go make a new level a little bit lower. And that's when we will really be paying attention to. Well, January 11th, okay? So if we come down into this area by January 11th, some kind of 468 or something like that, we could see a further breakdown if the news is bad, or if the news is good for the market. This would be a great level for buyers to step back in. The last time we were around this area, well, look right here. We actually saw buying come back in, consolidation, buying come back in pretty dang quick on this 30-minute. So it would be a good point to hold up. And I'm going to be paying attention to those weekly ranges on my yields. We overall talked about how, this just means we're pricing in way too many rate cuts. We talked about that for 2, maybe even 3 weeks ago. We started mentioning that because, when the Fed tells you, hey, we're gonna cut by 75 basis points, and you start pricing in 150, 175, that is the market getting way too excited way too fast. And now we're getting snapped back to reality. That's when we put out that video somewhere down in here. Hey, when this signal happened and we were breaking through, I said, this is very bad. You can see crashes happen because why do these rates need to come down so fast? Now we're getting snapped back to reality, which means we can buy some more time. You guys know that I'm really leaning towards this 4.362. I think that's a good point for us to get to. Maybe we do see that rapid fire move up here, which will bring some pain in the Qs, in those tech stocks, and then CPI is able to buy us back up. It's able to tell you, hey, the inflation has not necessarily raised as high as we're kind of stating throughout this narrative, right? We're getting the narrative of, hey, the jobs are still strong. This is still strong. So we need to keep the rate raises on the table, less rate cuts on the table. And so around this area, I'd really be looking for this to start to break down if that CPI is good news. If that CPI is bad news, you're going to see more pain because this is most likely going to continue. I'm not leaning towards that. I really think that the CPI will come out as good news and we'll see a further breakdown in these yields. Covered this on Saturday, but you notice that the TLT did cross and you're getting that sell signal. And the big part here is you're closing below all these moving averages, which just leads you to believe, hey, we're going to go to a point of liquidity. And we were pointing out this little bundle in here. It lines up with a lot of liquidity. So I want to pay attention to this next week. If we do see TLT actually sell off, and then we do get that CPI data and we're able to produce some good numbers for the market, then this will actually start to buy back up. We won't need those rates to really go up anymore, and TLT will see that, and we'll see this as a pullback. I was overall stating why this would be a pullback. Well, you have this divergence on the RSI, but you don't necessarily have it on the MACD at the same time. I like mine to be at the same time because you have more probability of that being some kind of trend reversal when you do have the RSI showing these and then the MACD not necessarily showing you that divergence. It just tells me, hey, I should be leaning a little bit more towards a pullback in TLT, which just tells me, sure, those rates might raise for a little bit, but then TLT might buy back up, pushing them back down. The last thing you really want to pay attention to on a weekly scale is the VIX. Okay, the VIX is showing you it's in some kind of range at this point, and we're going to go into the shorter time frames, but first we'll just cover the daily here. It's very close to getting into positive territory. Okay, so the last time that the VIX was able to get into positive territory, let's just use this one right over here. What happened? Okay, what started to happen? Well, volatility remained in the market for quite some time. So that has the potential to set up this week. And if this really starts to get into positive territory and hold at those levels, if the CPI comes out as bad news for the market, that's when I am really going to look at this weekly. If this weekly divergence does confirm, then that means we have some real big pain coming in 2024. We either have some kind of crash or some kind of bear market because we can get into positive territory. And that's really when we start to create that positive trend in the VIX. That's going to be where selling really continues for quite some time. The main takeaway here is we are seeing those divergences on those shorter time frames, but remember, we need some good news. We need a change in narrative in order for those divergences to produce bounces, to produce reversals. So at this point, if the narrative stays the same, we can expect probably more selling early on in the week, but we do have CPI. So CPI can really help out the market if it comes out as good for the stock market. We really can see us turn around and get one more push, maybe to get the SPY to an all-time high. So let's pay attention to the weekly charts on those individual stocks, because that might be hinting that we're about to see those weekly divergences on the SPY and the Qs confirm maybe in the week ahead. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. You're liking, you're subscribing, you're doing all the things, and thank you so much for the well wishes for my new baby coming on Valentine's Day. I'm very, very excited. Now, I am making a little bit less videos throughout the week, so if you do support this channel, I would love to make more videos for you guys throughout the week, but as of right now, I see some signals that are showing me maybe some hard times coming in 2024, which just means I need to work harder at my job, and that's what I'm going to do. But I'm still going to be giving you guys at least 3 videos a week on Sunday, Sunday, Wednesday, and Saturday morning. Anyway, wish you guys all the luck in the world trading this week. Appreciate it. Have a good night. Peace.